What's up, class? Welcome to Module 2 of Principles of Speech. Last week we talked about language as sound, the difference between the written language, which is a relatively modern invention, compared to spoken word and how we experience that. In the lecture, the last video lecture, I briefly talked about this idea that language probably originated out of a desire to tell stories. And so this week, as we move closer to beginning to give some of our speeches, all of our speeches revolve around one central story. You've got 4 total speeches. Your first speech is a story speech in which you will tell a story. Your second speech is a persuasive speech, which will be based on the same story you told in your first speech. Your third speech is an informative speech, which will be based on the story from your first speech. And your last speech is what's called a resistant audience speech. So imagine that an audience is resistant to what you're saying, or they disagree with you. How might you navigate that? All 4 speeches in this class are based off of one story. And if that sounds confusing right now, I understand. It'll make more sense as we move through the class. But before we even get to that point, we have to sort of come to a consensus about what a story is. And interestingly, if I asked you what a story was, I'm sure every single one of you would give me some explanation. You might talk about characters, you might talk about some sort of a conflict, but in reality, story is hard to define. Even though we play video games with stories, we watch movies, we binge watch Netflix shows, our phones and text messages are full of stories that we're telling each other, right? And so, but still, we don't really know how to describe what a story is. And so what we're going to do this module is come up with a simple definition of what a story is. And the reason that's important is because you are going to be telling a story all throughout this class, and really in every speech you ever give, no matter where you are, in a boardroom, at a business meeting, at an interview. Ultimately speaking, there are traces of storytelling in every type of speech. And even when you're not explicitly telling the story, if that's not the primary goal of your speech, there are still ways to use story to enhance your delivery of whatever it is you're saying. And so all of that is going to be explored throughout this class. And we're going to start this week with sort of just exploring what a story is, what our definition is. So we are going to begin with a very, very simple definition that I came up with a handful of years ago. This definition applies to every film, every movie, every game, every story that's ever been told. It has these elements, okay? You ready? A story is a person or a character who wants something, but must overcome something to get it. Okay? Remember that. A story is about a character that wants something, but has to overcome something to get it. That is the foundation that we're going to return to again and again throughout this semester. Stories can be complicated, and there can be lots of different elements in them and complications, but the basic structure is always about a character that wants something. And that something doesn't have to be a noble or good something, but they have to overcome something to get it. All right, so what we're going to do in this video lecture is kind of walk through those different elements. But there's several elements existing here, okay? But this is the baseline simple structure of a story. First, a story doesn't begin with an event, okay? In fact, we don't really care about events, right? We care about people. We care about characters. Think about your favorite Netflix show, your favorite film, It all begins with a character, and ultimately something happens to the character which makes us curious, okay? We're going to get there in just a second, though. But it begins with a character, all right? And so the character is what we're interested in. The character has to care as well, okay? There have to be something at stake with this character, all right? The stakes don't have to be big, all right? The stakes can be small. Maybe somebody wants acceptance. Maybe they want to prove something to themselves. Maybe they want to repair a relationship, or maybe they just want to get through an embarrassing moment without making it worse. It's not about how big the event is, but it's a character that wants something. There's something at stake here. There's something they could lose. There's something they could gain, and they care very deeply, all right? They care very deeply. So we're starting there with the character. We have to have a character that cares. The second thing is their character has to want something. This comes with the stakes, all right? This is really about desire. The character needs to want something. And it may sound obvious, but desire is what gives our character and our story some direction. Because the moment we know what the character wants, whether that be peace, acceptance, love, revenge, the moment we know what that character wants, we begin wondering how they're going to get it. All right? We want to know what's going to happen next. What are they going to do? How are they going to overcome this thing? All right? So imagine this. Imagine I go to school, I went to class, I ate lunch, and I went home, right? Those things all happened. But there's no story there, right? Because there's no clear desire moving those events forward, okay? And some of us tell stories that way. You know, how was your day? It was fine. I went to work. I did this. I did that. That's not really a story. Nobody's listening to that, right? But what if I changed that just a little bit? What if I said I walked into school knowing that before the day was over, I had to tell my best friend something I had been lying to them about? Suddenly we've got some kind of movement here, right? Because somebody wants or needs something, we begin asking questions, right? Are they going to tell them? Why haven't they told them already? What was the lie about? Or are they afraid something bad's going to happen when they tell them? Now we're sort of getting into the realm of a story, all right? The desire has to be clear to the audience. What the character wants has to be clear to the audience. And listen, when you're watching your Netflix shows and when you're watching movies, it's pretty clear within the first couple of minutes what the character wants. All right? It's pretty clear. You know, a TV show may come on and we'll see a character standing around lonely, and there in the distance there's people, a friend group laughing and having a good time, and we know, oh, our character's lonely. They want community. They want friends. Or we see a superhero looking at a ravaged land where evil has taken over. We know the superhero wants peace. We know they want, safety for people. Like, what the character wants is pretty clear pretty quickly. And it needs to be, because then that's what begins the process of the audience going, okay, I see what they want. How are they going to get what they want? We want to know what's going to happen. We become really, really curious. In fact, curiosity is what makes a story so powerful, right? Your brain experiences when you see a character enter into a moment on television, on a movie screen, in a video game. What happens to your brain is cognitive dissonance. It's like an itch in your brain. And you can't reach that itch until you know what happens, all right? It's very similar to when you're driving by and there's been a wreck, and you drive by and you drive really slowly and you're looking and you're rubbernecking. Ultimately, what you're trying to see is what happened. I think that's the primary driver of a really powerful story. What is going to happen? And what makes that so powerful is that we care about the character. The character feels relatable somehow, and maybe just a part of them feels relatable. Maybe we relate to their inner emotion. Maybe we relate to their circumstances, but we care about the characters. And once we care about the characters, we want to know what's going to happen to these characters. All right. Even though we know this is fake, even though we know most stories, like a film or a TV show or a video game, most of these things are not real. Our emotions and our brain sort of fires off as if they are. That's why if you've ever cried at a movie or a video game, isn't that interesting that even though you know the movie, the video game, the TV show is not real, you still experience real emotions. You feel fear, you feel hope, you feel excitement, you feel sadness, you feel sorrow. So our brains don't do a good job of distinguishing, story from reality sometimes. That's what makes story so powerful, which is what we're going to explore more next week. But the character has to want something, and we have to know exactly what it is they want. All right. So remember, a story is about a character that wants something but has to overcome something to get it. So we need to know, as the audience, who the character is. We need to know they care, and we have to know what it is they want. That has to be very clear to us so we can see it. Sometimes the desire is going to be, what they want is going to be external. I want money. I want success. I want the job. I want to win the game. I want to get home. I want to find my true love. But sometimes, that desire is more internal. They want forgiveness, or they want acceptance, or confidence, or belonging, or peace. And the reality is that most really powerful stories feature characters that want both. Something external, and there's some internal things happening as well. So let's imagine our character wakes up, they're living their life, and then all of a sudden, they want peace, they want acceptance from the world, they want to feel like they belong, and then something gets in the way. For a story to work, for a story to be a story, where most of the story happens, it's the character interacting with the thing that has gotten in the way of what they want. They want something, but something stands between them and what they want. This is conflict. And when I say conflict, I don't mean fighting. It doesn't mean that every story has to have a villain. Conflict is whatever makes it difficult for the character to get what they want. Okay? Sometimes, like in a big superhero movie, the obstacle is another person. Or maybe sometimes it's money. That's the conflict. I don't have enough money to do the thing I want to do. Sometimes it can be distance. Maybe it's time, right? It can be a rule or an illness or a circumstance that the character cannot control, right? All of these things can act as conflicts. And they do, but some of the more profound, the simple but profound conflicts happen inside the character. A character who feels fear or too much pride or maybe shame or self-doubt, anger, an inability to forgive, or some, lie they believe about themselves. This is called vulnerability. When we begin to relate to the deeper essence of who a character is, we're relating to their vulnerability, the parts of them that maybe they feel exposed by. This vulnerability, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in the coming weeks, audiences connect to vulnerable characters always, okay? Audiences connect to vulnerable characters because that's where they find themselves. Because the reality is that life is hard for all of us, right? Many of us are confused, we're anxious, we're overwhelmed. Maybe we experience depression. Maybe we have low self-confidence. Maybe we are unsure, right? There are things about each one of us that we feel exposed by. And so when we see that happen in a character on screen, or when we hear a person be vulnerable with us while telling a story, we automatically connect to that because we find parts of ourselves in that. We may not even share the same vulnerability, but just the idea that somebody is willing to share that is powerful, and we're drawn to that. So the strongest characters, the characters that we connect with most deeply on screen, in books, on TV shows, in real life, even with friends and family, are the ones who show vulnerabilities. All right. So, and what these vulnerabilities can be conflicts. Absolutely. Right. They are essentially conflicts because I've used myself for an example. Like if I say that I am anxious, right, that is a vulnerability. Me sharing it is a vulnerability, and it's also a literal vulnerability, right? Because it makes my life more difficult moment to moment. So I am vulnerable to the world around me, and that anxiety may get in the way of things I want to accomplish. Let's just say that I want to go make some new friends, but I have social anxiety. That vulnerability, that thing becomes a conflict. It becomes the thing standing in the way of me and what I want. All right. So I want to be really clear here that just because something bad happens, it's not automatically a conflict when we're telling a story. Like not all bad things are conflicts. They can complicate things, right? But they're not always conflict. So conflict and desire go hand in hand. Okay. If I desire something and I'm trying to get it and I cannot get it, that is the conflict. There is no conflict without desire. Now you may be saying, like, how can that be? Well, let's just say that I am lonely, right? Let's just say that I'm alone. I have no friends, but I don't really care, right? I don't have a desire for friends. Therefore, the act of not having friends, I'm not conflicted by that. Let's say that I'm broke, right? But I don't care to have money. I like living simply, right? There is no conflict because there is no desire. Conflict and desire go hand in hand, okay? They exist together. All right, so the next element. So far we are at a character who wants something, and there has to be something getting in the way of what they want, all right? They have to recognize that problem, all right? The audience, we can't just recognize it. The character has to recognize it. And this is something that's overlooked sometimes because a character can't overcome an obstacle they do not recognize. A person cannot overcome something that they do not recognize as an obstacle. That is true for real life too. That is why sometimes I will tell students, do not tell a story about something you have not dealt with yet. Okay? Do not tell a story about something you have not dealt with yet, because you cannot yet see the mountain and how high it goes. All right? So our character, and in this case you are going to be the character in all of your speeches. You cannot speak of overcoming an obstacle that you have no knowledge of, all right? Especially when the conflict is internal. Maybe looking back, you realized that fear was keeping you from doing something. Maybe pride damaged a relationship. Maybe you desperately wanted acceptance and did not realize at the time how much that desire was controlling your choices. That recognition of the problem is, in many ways, the most interesting part of a personal story. And that's also why storytelling involves more than just remembering what happened. It's more than just recounting events. What telling a story is asking you to do, it's asking you, as the storyteller, to understand what happened to you. And there's a big difference, because we can remember the events of our life without having any understanding of what they meant. Story begins to sort of bubble up when we can look back and say, okay, in that moment, this is what I wanted, this is what stood in the way, and this is what I did because of it. So ultimately, I think self-awareness gives the story shape. So you'll notice that I've sort of stopped talking about characters on screen, and I've kind of transitioned into talking about you. because you are going to be telling stories in this class, 4 of them. One is just going to be an outright story. And then you're going to use that same story at the basis of your persuasive speech, at the basis of your informative speech, and at the basis of your resistant audience speeches. All right. So you have to be self-aware enough to look back on your life, look at a moment, examine that moment, and look at, okay, in that moment, this is what I wanted. This is what I overcame. And this is what I had to do to overcome that. And that vulnerability and bringing the audience into that moment is what gives the story its power. And again, module 3, we're going to talk about the power of storytelling. I think you guys are going to be surprised at just how powerful stories are. And maybe you already recognize the power of stories. All right. So within this, we have a character who wants something but has to overcome something to get it. In this case, you are the character. The conflict, the thing that stands in the way of you and what you want, it forces characters to make choices. All right. Once a character wants something and they encounter that obstacle and they have to respond somehow. You had to do something. You had to make a choice somehow. And sometimes you made the right choice, and sometimes you made the wrong choice. Characters on screen, sometimes they make the right choice, sometimes they make the wrong choice, sometimes they avoid making a choice altogether. But in this moment, when we're watching how our characters navigate the conflict, it is their choices that reveal the deeper essence of them. We discover who people are by watching what they do when they care and when that caring becomes difficult, about when what they care about becomes difficult. This gives you a really natural progression, right? So let's think about the progression of story. Think about yourself here. You have a character, you have a desire, you have an obstacle, and then you have the decisions that have to be made to overcome the obstacle. And it is these decisions that usually create some kind of a change. The character may succeed, they may fail, they may get exactly what they want, but this is where the transformation begins. This is why at the end of a story, usually, most of the time, the character is a different person. There is a transformation. That doesn't mean the character won. That doesn't mean that there's a happy ending, but there's some kind of movement and there is a shift that has happened by the end of the story. All right. Some sort of a transformation. All right. And this transformation isn't always external. Maybe nothing in the world changes, but the character finally has some kind of an understanding they didn't have before. All right. So the larger structure that we're going to build from here, character want, something's at stake here, the obstacle. When I say something's at stake, like there's a reason why I have to overcome the obstacle. Okay, something's at stake. My peace, my happiness, my joy. Like I have to go forward into this obstacle and overcome it. When I'm in that obstacle, when I'm in the storm, I make decisions, and those decisions lead to shifts. All right. This is what a story is, all right? All of you are intimately familiar with what a story is because you watch TV, you watch movies, and you engage with stories at all times, at every level, and you communicate in stories, all right? Your life is full of stories, all right? So often I have students tell me like, oh, I don't have anything to talk about. So, the best stories aren't big things. Sometimes they can be really, really small moments that mean something deeply to you. So I want you to begin thinking about what story you may tell. Now, that doesn't mean you have to tell me the worst thing that ever happened to you. You don't need necessarily trauma. It doesn't have to be some unbelievable experience that nobody in the room has ever had. It can be those things, but it doesn't have to be. All your story needs to be is true. You need to give some vulnerability, bring the audience in, share us who you are, what did you want, what did you have to overcome, what was at stake, what decisions did you make to overcome that or to navigate that, and what changed by the end. And along the way, tell us what you were thinking and what you were feeling. Bring us into those deeper moments. And as we'll discuss next week, we'll talk about why those deeper moments are so important, rather. So the questions I want you thinking about this week, all right? There's 4 questions pertaining to a story you might tell, all right? 4 simple questions, all right? Number 1, what happened? Number 2, what did you want? Number 3, what stood in the way of what you wanted? And number 4, what changed because of it? All right, so all I want you doing this week, I want you looking backward at things you've already, experiences you've already lived, at memories, and begin to look at your life like a storyteller. All right? And you don't have to know everything yet. We're going to walk through that together, but begin thinking about what story you might tell. All right, appreciate you guys. See you on the other side.